1.35 US cents. I mean, if you pull up your latest utility bill right now, whether you are in the United States or Europe or really most major markets, you are likely looking at a charge of, 10, 15, maybe even 20 cents a kilowatt hour.
Oh, easily, at least.
Right. But in a single massive project in the Abu Dhabi desert, utility scale power is actively being generated right now for just over a single penny. It is just a mind-boggling number.
Today we are pulling all of our insights from one deeply fascinating document. It is an excerpt titled The Economics of Infinite Sunlight.
And it is a document that is honestly forcing the entire energy sector to just completely recalibrate its baseline assumptions, like about the absolute floor of energy economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to explore exactly how the levelized cost of energy got so staggeringly low at this one site, the Al Dhafra Solar PV project, and why veteran analysts were initially, highly skeptical of the numbers.
Which is completely understandable, honestly. Yeah, and most importantly, we are going to look at why this one specific project in the desert fundamentally rewrites the rules of the game for the global energy market.
Because when a number like 1.35 cents drops, it is not just some anomaly. It is a proof of concept, one that really threatens the traditional dominance of thermal and combustion-based power generation on a purely mathematical basis.
I have to admit, when I first read that headline figure of 1.35 cents a kilowatt hour, my immediate reaction was that this had to be a typo or like a theoretical math problem.
Right, like a projection.
Exactly. I assumed it was one of those theoretical models where researchers assume, zero supply chain friction, perfect weather for 30 years, and absolutely zero degradation of the panels. It just did not sound like a boots-on-the-ground, commercially viable figure.
Well, you were definitely not alone in that assumption. Across the industry, when figures sub 2 cents are announced, the instinct is to just dismiss them as heavily subsidized promotional numbers.
Right.
Or maybe a loss leader strategy by a developer just trying to capture market share.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
But what's fascinating here is how explicitly the source text shuts down that skepticism. The Al Dhafra project is not just a proposal on a whiteboard. It is physically built. It is fully commissioned, and it is actively pushing massive volumes of electrons into the grid right now under a locked-in long-term contract.
Which naturally leads me to my next assumption. Because when I see a price drop that drastically, I usually assume someone invented a brand new technology, like a magic new solar cell. Did they?
No, actually.
Seriously. Because I figured someone must have deployed some commercial-scale perovskite tandem cell or a radical new quantum dot material that suddenly just doubled the efficiency of standard silicon. I mean, absent a massive technological leap, my brain just struggles to process a price drop this steep.
It is a totally logical jump. I mean, we are highly conditioned by the tech sector to associate cost collapse with a sudden disruptive invention. But the text is definitive on this point. There is no magic proprietary panel technology at play in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, they are utilizing standard commercially available photovoltaic technology, primarily just high-efficiency monocrystalline bifacial modules.
So no secret lab tech at all, which means the 1.35 cents isn't the result of a single silver bullet, but rather an extreme optimization of variables.
Precisely. It is a structural convergence.
Okay, so if it's a structural convergence, our source lays out a really specific set of conditions that collided at this site, a sort of perfect recipe. I want to deconstruct this formula, starting with a raw fuel itself, the sun.
Yes, the geographical advantage is huge here. Abu Dhabi sits in a latitude with some of the highest direct normal irradiance, or DNI, on the planet. We are talking about intense, consistent, direct sunlight for the vast majority of the year.
I want to push back on that slightly, or at least add a layer of friction. Because pure sunlight isn't the whole story, is it?
Not entirely, no.
Right, because anyone who follows solar tech knows about the temperature coefficient problem. Solar panels actually lose efficiency as they get hotter.
They do.
So if you put a standard silicon panel in a scorching desert environment, its instantaneous output drops compared to a mild sunny day in, say, California. So how does extreme desert heat result in record low prices?
That is a really crucial nuance. You are absolutely correct about the temperature coefficient. Extreme heat does degrade the efficiency of the module in real time. However, the sheer volume and consistency of the sunlight throughout the year more than compensates for that thermal loss.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when you model the cost over a 25 or 30-year life cycle, predictability is king. The lack of heavy cloud cover, minimal seasonal variation, and the extended daylight hours mean the capacity factor of the plant is just exceptionally high. You are simply running at near peak yield day after day.
So the sheer brute force of the sunlight essentially overcomes the heat penalty.
Exactly.
The yield curve is just remarkably fat and predictable.
Yes. And when your output is that highly predictable, the financial modeling becomes incredibly tight. You don't have to build in massive contingency margins for weather anomalies, which instantly shaves fractions of a cent off the projected cost.
But all that intense, predictable photon capture doesn't mean anything if you don't have the physical footprint to capture it. Because when I look at energy infrastructure globally, the biggest bottleneck usually isn't the technology, it is the real estate. And our source specifically highlights the vast, flat land with minimal competing use.
Which is exactly the second factor in this recipe. This is an area where the geographic realities of the UAE provide a massive structural advantage. Because in Western markets, soft costs and land acquisition can account for a staggering percentage of a solar project's total budget.
Right. Like if you want to build a massive solar farm in Europe or the US, you are fighting a multi-year battle.
Oh, absolutely.
You are dealing with complex zoning laws, environmental impact studies, and severe NIMBYism, not in my backyard from local residents.
Yeah, the permitting alone is a nightmare.
Exactly. You might have to buy out prime agricultural land or clear forests. And every single lawyer, every permit, every month of delay gets amortized into the final price of the electricity.
Not to mention the civil engineering costs. If the land is undulating or rocky, you spend millions just grading the earth and driving steel pylons into difficult terrain. But Al Dhafra is situated in a vast, flat, expansive desert. There are no competing agricultural interests.
There are no suburban zoning boards to fight.
Right, and it is geometrically flat. You are essentially just rolling out standard racking systems over sand. The civil engineering costs are basically just the cost of labor to bolt the steel together.
Which perfectly transitions us into the third factor in this formula. And frankly, I think this is the actual engine of the 1.35 cent number, the financing.
Yes. The capital.
Because solar power generation is uniquely capital intensive. With a natural gas or coal plant, your initial build is expensive, but your real cost is the operational expenditure, buying the fuel continuously for 30 years.
But solar have a fuel cost of exactly zero.
Right. It is almost entirely capital expenditure, upfront capex.
That is the defining economic characteristic of renewable energy. Because the variable cost is effectively zero, the overall cost of the energy is overwhelmingly dictated by the initial cost of construction. And, more importantly, how that construction is financed.
So let's talk about that financing, specifically the weighted average cost of capital, or WACC, because it really doesn't get enough attention. If I'm a private developer building a billion-dollar solar farm, I have to borrow that money.
Right.
And if the banks view my project as somewhat risky, maybe there's regulatory uncertainty, or my company's credit isn't perfect, they might charge me a 7 or 8% interest rate. Over 30 years, the interest payments alone could cost more than the physical solar panels.
And this is where the source text points to the massive advantage of Abu Dhabi. Large-scale financing backed by strong sovereign credit and state-linked investment.
So explain how that sovereign wealth fundamentally alters the risk model.
Well, when a project is backed by a state-linked entity in a remarkably wealthy nation like the UAE, the perceived default risk basically approaches absolute zero. Global financial institutions are essentially lending against the sovereign wealth of the nation, not just the isolated cash flow of the solar project.
So it is the difference between getting a personal loan on a credit card versus getting a loan backed by the U.S. Treasury.
Precisely. Because the risk is so heavily mitigated, the cost of capital plummets. They might be securing debt at 1%, 2%, or at incredibly favorable long-term terms. When you are amortizing billions of dollars of upfront capex, dropping your interest rate drastically shrinks the necessary break-even price of the power.
To put an analogy on it, it's like two neighbors buying the exact same house. One gets a 30-year fixed mortgage at 8% interest, and the other gets a heavily subsidized mortgage at 1%. The second neighbor's monthly payment is going to be astronomically lower, even though the physical house is identical.
That's a great way to look at it.
In Abu Dhabi, the mortgage on the solar farm is backed by some of the deepest pockets on Earth.
And when you combine that negligible cost of capital With the minimal soft costs of the desert terrain we discussed, the structural economics become almost unbeatable.
But there is still a physical product to buy, right?
Yep.
The panels themselves. And our source outlines a fourth factor here: the fierce global competition driving down the actual hardware costs.
Yes.
I want to look at the mechanism behind this because it's a textbook example of rights law in action.
Rights law, exactly. Also known as the learning curve effect.
Yeah.
It is the principle that for every cumulative doubling of manufacturing volume, the cost of production falls by a consistent percentage.
Right. And in solar manufacturing, that learning rate has historically hovered around 20% or more, meaning the more panels the world makes, the cheaper every individual panel becomes.
And it is not just about cheaper labor. It is about extreme automation, massive economies of scale in polysilicon refining, and fiercely optimized supply chains.
Yeah.
The manufacturing hubs, primarily concentrated in Asia, have scaled their output to a level that was just unimaginable a decade ago. We've transitioned from boutique, fragmented manufacturing to massive, vertically integrated gigafactories. They are churning out high-efficiency modules at a true commodity price point.
And Abu Dhabi, despite not manufacturing the panels themselves, is perfectly positioned to harvest the benefits of that global price war. Because they are placing orders for gigawatts of capacity at a time, they command the absolute lowest bulk pricing from Tier 1 manufacturers.
It is the ultimate buyer's market for solar hardware right now.
Okay, so if I'm synthesizing this right, it's kind of like baking the ultimate incredibly cheap cake. You aren't inventing a new type of flour, you just happen to live inside a flour mill, your oven is naturally heated, and you have a billionaire cosigner for your grocery run.
That is a perfect analogy, yes.
Yeah.
When you combine those four pillars, the highly predictable sun, the vast flat land, the sovereign-backed financing, and the rock-bottom hardware pricing, you don't just get cheap electricity, you get an entirely new economic paradigm.
So what does this all mean? We have established the mechanics. We know exactly how they hit 1.35 cents. But if I am a utility planner in Germany or Texas or Japan, I don't have a flat, sun-drenched desert. And I certainly don't have an oil-backed sovereign wealth fund co-signing my loans.
Right.
Why does a localized anomaly in the Middle East matter to the rest of the global grid? Why should our listener, who lives thousands of miles away, care?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Aldafer project functions as a psychological and financial anchor for the entire global energy market. In commodities and energy, expectations drive investment. When a confirmed operational contract is signed at 1.35 cents, it permanently resets global expectations for what electricity can cost under optimal conditions.
It destroys the old baseline.
Completely. A utility planner in Europe might run their own local models and realize they can only hit 3.5 cents or 4 cents because of higher land costs and less sun. But historically, they might have assumed 6 or 7 cents was the absolute floor.
I see.
Now, capital markets look at Abu Dhabi and realize the technology itself is capable of producing power at near zero cost. It forces global developers to aggressively squeeze their own supply chains and financing models to try and close that gap.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I think this is the source's most crucial takeaway. This isn't just about solar competing with other forms of solar. It is about utility-scale solar increasingly competing with and actually undercutting fossil fuel generation purely on a cost basis.
Yes, we are witnessing the merit order effect playing out on a macroeconomic scale. When you operate a power grid, you generally dispatch the cheapest available power first. Because a solar farm has zero fuel cost, its marginal cost of generating the next electron is zero.
Which means once the capital is deployed, the power is practically free to produce.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, a natural gas plant has a hard floor. Even if someone gave you $1 billion gas plant for free, like literally zero capex, you still have to buy the liquid natural gas every single day to run the turbines.
And that operational expenditure puts a hard, unyielding floor on the price of thermal power. What the economics of infinite sunlight demonstrate is that we have crossed a massive inflection point. The amortized capex of massive solar projects is now frequently dropping below the bare minimum OPEX of fossil fuel plants.
I want to emphasize how staggering that is. It means that in certain conditions, it is mathematically cheaper to build a massive new solar plant from absolute scratch than it is to simply continue operating a fully paid-off coal or gas plant.
Right.
You don't even need to factor in carbon taxes or environmental mandates. The invisible hand of the market is actively strangling thermal generation purely on a spreadsheet.
The transition from a fuel-based energy economy to an infrastructure-based energy economy is well underway. The text is very careful to acknowledge that the specific 1.35 cent number requires the unique UAE conditions. But the underlying mechanisms, rights law and hardware, and innovative low-cost capital deployment are highly exportable.
Right. A developer in Texas can't export the sovereign wealth fund, but they can emulate the massive scale to secure cheaper capital. They can't export the exact same amount of sun, but they can leverage the same plummeted hardware costs. The gravity of these massive projects just pulls the global average down with it.
And as financial institutions become increasingly comfortable with the risk profile of these utility-scale projects, the cost of capital will continue to compress globally, which just accelerates the displacement of thermal assets.
Okay, let's pull back and look at the trajectory we've mapped out today. We started with a number that literally looked like a typo, 1.35 cents a kilowatt hour. We stripped away the assumption of a magic technological breakthrough and found, basically, a structural masterclass.
A perfect storm of extreme geographic irradiance, unconstrained physical real estate, sovereign de-risked capital, and global manufacturing scale.
And we saw how that highly localized cocktail creates a ripple effect that threatens the foundational economics of fossil fuels worldwide. It proves that when the structural barriers are removed, the cost of capturing sunlight approaches zero.
It is the ultimate demonstration of zero marginal cost economics disrupting a legacy industry.
Which brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought. The source material hints at this, and it is something you really have to pause and digest. For over 2 centuries, human industrial progress has been entirely dependent on extracting finite fuel from the Earth's crust and combusting it. Our entire geopolitical order was built around access to coal seams, oil fields, and natural gas reserves.
It was an era defined by the geology of extraction.
But if we are entering an era where the cheapest, most dominant form of energy is no longer extracted but harvested from the surface, how does that rewrite the map of global power?
That is the big question.
Right. If the value of energy is completely untethered from combustible fuels, the most valuable geopolitical real estate on Earth is no longer necessarily sitting over an oil reserve.
This raises such an important question about the 21st century. Do the massive, sun-scorched, empty deserts of the world, places historically viewed as harsh or inhospitable, do they suddenly become the primary engines of global wealth?
Are we looking at a future where a nation's energy supremacy is determined simply by how much flat, cloudless land they control? It is a staggering geopolitical shift, all disguised as a simple drop in the price of electricity. So, the next time you open up that utility bill or read about a new power plant being built, think about those sun-drenched panels in the desert. Think about how a number as small as 1.35 cents is quietly, relentlessly rewriting the economic foundation of our entire planet. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material, and keep that curiosity alive.